Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here in Tartu. I'm sorry I'm only speaking in English. I'm not speaking your language, and I'm coming from a totally different scientific position. I'm an ethnographer, so I work in an ethnographic museum, so I don't have the expertise all of you have. Maybe you can tell me much more about the things you're going to see than I know, but that's the idea of a conference, right? So I don't feel ashamed about it. The reason I'm here is because the beautiful boat model you see here in the picture is going to be seen in the exhibition downstairs, and that's also the reason I was invited here to speak, I assume, but I use the opportunity to introduce you to the Estonian collection, our museum, how we use it, the history of the collection, and some future ideas, how it might be useful. I also refer to how museums in Germany change currently. Let's see, this is a building where we work, the Zeughaus. It's very close to the Lübeck Cathedral. That's where the collection is stored. It's about 30,000 objects from all around the globe and from the early Stone Age to 2025. 30,000 objects altogether and about 200 from Estonia. The topic of the conference, of the exhibition, really catched my attention as an ethnographer because waterways have always been a crucial thing in world history. The most prominent example in ethnography would be what we call the Austronesian expansion, the whole settling, the whole population of the Pacific Ocean and parts of the Indian Ocean all happened on waterways. That's the greatest migration in the history of mankind, and it all happened with boats. It all happened on waterways. We are currently preparing an exhibition about the Silk Road in our exhibition, and that's also related to waterways. We all know about the inland trade routes of silk, but even more important are waterways are. For example, Arab traders, Chinese traders who traveled all the way to Eastern Africa centuries before the first Europeans arrived there. For example, here you see some photos from my recent trip to Tanzania where I did some research. Some of the traditional Arabic boats are still in use, and here you see the tomb of a Tanzanian ruler. It has an Arabic inscription, and in the pillar of the tomb you find Ming Chinese dynasty porcelain integrated into the tomb. So this really shows about trade connections. So it's really a big important topic we are talking here about. But of course, boat models are also an important part of our collection, and they can tell a lot of different stories. They are like archives of knowledge of how boats were built. They can refer to particular historical stories. And in some cases, they can even heal certain wounds, I would say, wounds that were, for example, caused by colonialism. Here you see a boat model which is coming from the island of Kodiak, which belongs to Alaska in the USA. And this island was conquered by the Russians and formed into a Russian colony, later taken over by the Americans. And the people on this island had very advanced boat building skills. They built big boats to move entire families between Siberia and America back and forth. It was made with wood, driftwood, and also with animal skin. But with the arrival of the Russians and later the Americans, the people were no longer allowed to build such boats. It was not allowed anymore to move between the continents, and so the boat building skills were lost. But over a century later, two researchers from Alaska came to our museum, studied this model, and finally in 2016, such a boat was rebuilt for the first time, and now the people in Alaska have this boat building knowledge again. So museums can really be archives, can really help to bring back things that were lost in the past, can even heal some things which were destroyed in very dark chapters of history. That's an important message, I think, for all our museums, that it's really relevant part of our work. So what do we have next? Let's turn to the Estonian collection. It's about 200 objects, and most of them come from our first museum's director. His name was Richard Karuts, and he traveled to Estonia in the year 1918, and he collected a number of objects. About 115 of them are still remaining in our museum after 2 world wars. And here you see a small selection of them. I will not go into details here. I just wanted to give you a visual impression of what we have here. There's some other collections also. For example, we know literally nothing about this collection. We only know it's coming from a man who was called Dr. Frank. Maybe he was a medical, and he lived in Pärnu, and he donated objects to our museum 2 times, in the year 1900 and in the year 1920. And in the year 1920, he didn't live in Pärnu anymore. That's all we know, but it would be really interesting to know more if this person is known, if we could find out more about these objects. And there are also minor connections like you find individual pieces in collections from Lübeck merchants, Lübeck, for example, ambassadors traveling the Russian empires who brought some objects from Estonia as well, but I won't go into details here, just to show you. What I want to talk about is how ethnographic museums work today, because they have changed a lot over time. The traditional role of an ethnographic museum is, for me as a German white curator, to tell some other German guests about how the cultures of the world work. And this is a very traditional way of doing museum work, and it's not very good, to be honest, because I'm not familiar with all the cultures, and I'm not capable of speaking in much detail and with much competence about these things. So we try to build up new partnerships, but we also try to have a different look at the objects. For example, we no longer see objects just as objects. Down you see a picture of one of our African cooperation partners, a lady from Gabon, and she's looking at one of the statues from our collection. And to her, the statue, this African statue, is not just an object. For her, it's a sacred relic. For her, it's not an object, it's something which has a soul inside, and this, of course, makes our museum work quite different. Also, we begin to ask, like, how is it possible that 10,000 objects, for example, from the African continent came to a tiny museum in Lübeck? This, of course, links us to the history of colonialism. When we ask who was the person who donated this object to the museum, how did he get pieces from Africa, then we can find out certain details, and sometimes it's not very nice things we find out. Sometimes we are confronted with dark chapters of German history. Sometimes we are confronted with stereotypes, with prejudices of that time, and that's also something we want to illustrate in our exhibitions. What we really want to do is community-based research. Our idea is to work together with local communities. We call them the source communities. We try to work as closely as possible with local communities, for example, on a village level, ask the descendants, how do you think about the fact that these things are in Germany now? How do you feel about it? Do you think they should be returned? Is there any knowledge left? Sorry? Sorry?
Burning bronzes.
For example, yeah. And such a process can come to different conclusions. We can do a joint exhibition, we can do a transfer of ownership, sometimes objects are restituted too, so there's a lot of different possibilities. And in this paper, it might be controversial, but I would argue that such a post-colonial approach can also be attributed to the Carrots collection. First of all, the date when he did his collection work is very important. It's the year 1918. It was a very specific moment in history. After the first Estonian independence, German troops briefly occupied Estonia. You are certainly aware of this fact. And Carrots actually took this opportunity to do his collection work. He was not only a museum director, he was also a medical officer, so he had a military rank, and he had support by the German army to do his collection trip. And this, of course, raises questions like, how did he get his hands on this collection? Did he collect things himself? Did he pay a fair price to local farmers? Did he rely on Baltic German families? What were the power relations, and so on? For example, there's one object in the collection which reminds us about the power structures in this area. And I have to admit, this is also part of my family history, because I'm also coming from a Baltic German family. My grandfather was born in Tallinn, and to be very honest, I'm sorry to say, he did not speak very positively about Estonians. He did not see them as equal to the German families. That's also something we have to recognize in Germany. So, I feel there's also a kind of colonial situation. But also we need to talk about Russian propaganda, which was influencing German views of Estonia during the time of the Tsaristic Empire, but also after 1945. But I'm coming back to this later. Carrots, of course, a researcher working in 1918, produced a lot of ideas and theories we have to be critical about. He had ideas about universal evolution, about racial hierarchies. For example, in one of his books, he wrote that the people of Finland are racially inferior, and only thanks to the help of the more advanced Germanic Swedes, they were able to become a real nation. So you get an idea about his ideas. And for him, Estonia was really, really interesting, but not for the sake of Estonians, but he called Estonia a rare case study of a primitive culture. In Germany, industrialization had made a lot of progress in this time, and like a generation before Karuts, all the local farmers produced their own goods, but things were changing. Nobody was able to do this anymore. People just bought things made in the factory, and he felt like he could still go to Estonia and find some handmade handicrafts, and that would be very important. He also had this idea like all cultures of the world function according to a similar scheme of evolution. So his idea was, if we look into the belief of Estonian peasants about their pre-Christian traditions still continued, you could get an idea also about how medieval or Stone Age Germans would have thought and acted, which is of course not very convincing anymore today. And of course, there's a lot of mistakes. You see here an object from the Karuts collection. He called it a bridal crown from Estonia, and I'm no expert, but I'm quite sure it's not from Estonia, it's from Latvia. And you also see it was photographed upside down. So yeah, mistakes continue to happen. That's what's happening when people do research on objects they don't fully understand. And that's why it's so important to work together with partners from the countries. This is one of the books Karuts published about his work. It's called The Peoples of Europe, and he made like pages with short description of every tribe of Europe. And he spent like 6 pages on Estonia, which is quite a lot compared to, he didn't even spend a single page on France because he hated the French people. So Estonia was quite prominent for him. And you see some of the things he saw on his travels. You see a lot of objects he collected during his trip, including some objects which are no longer in our collection, because some of the objects already got lost in the First World War, and some others were lost in the Second World War. Because in the Second World War, here in this picture, that's a picture from 1942, you see our museum. It was hit by a British bomb, and in the background you see the towers of the Lübeck Cathedral, which was also hit by British bombs. So in 1942, our museum burned. About 1/3 of the collection was destroyed, and all written documents in our archive also burned. So we have no written evidence about the surviving objects at all. So a lot of information is lacking today. And yeah, after the war, there was, of course, not much funding available for museums. First of all, the idea was to reopen a museum. The British liberators of Lübeck said it would be a good idea to start an ethnographic museum to re-educate the Germans, but there was no money, and then the whole ethnographic collection was first loaned to Hamburg. Then the museum was reopened, but the museum focused more on Asia, on Africa, not really on European countries at all. There was only one very tiny exhibition mentioning Estonia in the early 1990s. This was called Our Neighbors in the East, but it was more like a general introduction to Eastern European countries. Some highlights, including the model of the barge you see here in the exhibition, were also shown in a highlight exhibition of our collection in the year 2011 and also published in a catalog. And starting in 2012, we started a digitalization project. So every Estonian object you see here in this presentation and every object I'm not referring to has been photographed and is available to anyone who is interested. We can share photos online, for example, if you're interested to learn more. Then, yeah, I think it was in 2019, one object was loaned to the Estonian National Museum, which gave me the first amazing opportunity to get to know Tartu and to see how advanced museum work is happening in the city. And some objects were also shown more recently in an exhibition in 2023. It's called In War and Peace, and it was an effort of our museum to work together with refugees from Ukraine. We wanted to talk about connections between Lübeck and the, let's say, the Eastern Slavic area, Russia, Ukraine in particular. And it was a very important exhibition because all the ancient collections in our museum have been labeled as Russian objects, and there was no distinction at all. And with the help of our Ukrainian co-curators, we realized that many objects which were labeled Russians are in fact Ukrainian, for example. And we also realized how much stereotypes about Eastern Europe are still around in Germany, how much difficulties people still have to distinguish the different nations. That was very important. We also exhibited some more objects from the Karol's collection, and he did not only do his collection work in Estonia, he also traveled to other countries like Uzbekistan, for example, Kazakhstan, and collected things there. Like, for example, he collected headgear from different countries, and we put them in the exhibition to show that Karol's efforts were to distinguish the different people, to tell the people about diversity. And I feel this message of communicating diversity is still very important up to the present day because of the stereotypes, the misunderstandings that remain in Germany. So last but not least, this is a difficult topic, but I feel it's important to be touched. We also realized in the course of our exhibition that propaganda is influencing us still very much, and the rivers that have been connecting us in the past can sometimes be borders today. You're all aware about this. And yeah, so when we talk about colonialism, we also need to be aware that what happened in the Russian Empire, what happened also in the time of the Soviet Union, for example, in Estonia, is not very much known in Germany. The politics are not very much known. Some people are really uncritical about it. There's a nostalgic feeling about the Eastern German history related to socialism and so on. And so I think when we talk about colonialism as a global phenomenon, it's also very important to talk about Russia as well, to put Russia on this map of colonial history as well. And yeah, some people say maybe it's not good to touch on these topics, maybe it's not good to start collaborations in this part of the world now. Some people even, to be honest, criticized me to allow to bring the barge here because they said, oh, Estonia is so close to the Russian border. I'm really sorry to say this, but this is reality in Germany now. But I feel this is totally wrong. I feel now is the best time to work together. And we have this collection. It's, of course, not a very spectacular collection. It's not as important as many things you see in the museums here in Tartu, but maybe there's somebody interested to do research with us. Maybe we can arrange a PhD scholarship, maybe a group of students willing to work with us. There will be funding opportunities and we will be very happy. And also I want to invite anybody who's interested to ask us for loans, ask us for collaboration things. We really feel we want to be useful. That's the important thing for an ethnographic museum. We keep these things in Germany, but if there's any option in Estonia to make these things useful for Estonians, we are very open to this and we do our best to support it. So here's my email. If you want to get in touch with me, if you want to see pictures or want to share information, please get in touch. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much for a nice introduction to Karol's collection and to also introduce us to a background, how it was formed and what is the story behind it. I'm sure there will be questions. Kindlasti on küsimusi. Ja, Enrico juba.
Entschuldigung, ich kann nicht fragen alles auf Deutsch. Das ist meistens hier auf Englisch stehend. So if we can get such a proposal from Estonian National Museum, give us back. Those are Benin bronzes or those Lord Elgin marbles from London British Museum. So what do you say? I don't know. Kas me küsime tagasi, eks ju, our Estonian treasures, we have thousands of them, but they are there. Because we have even here Estonian artists like Ülo Sooster in New York. There are people telling, give them back. But they are exhibited there. The Estonian culture is exhibited in Lübeck. So what can you answer? Just this, not very clean question, but if there comes, are you giving them back or telling no? We are exhibiting them.
There's two options. Actually, no, there's more than two options. But first of all, there's a legal answer to your question. The legal answer, it depends on how objects are required and how historical documents are available, if there's some proof, for example, that Karuts used his military power, that the situation that Germany was occupying Estonia at this time influenced his collection, and if the national government of Estonia would ask the Lübeck Museum to return the objects, it's very likely that the Lübeck Museums would do this. It depends on if there's written evidence about historical injustice, which is of course difficult to prove in events 100 years ago. But you're also right, some communities we work with say we don't want restitution, we want to have the knowledge, we want to have photographs of all the things, and we want to have these objects in Germany as cultural ambassadors. That's what they say. They say these objects are a testimony, are a witness, they help us to do. To be honest, the objects you see here, they are in our storage area. We have no permanent exhibition. These objects are not on display. So I feel it would be very important in this time to do an exhibition about Estonia and Germany, to fight prejudices, to tell the people about the value, the riches of this country, but we would need to have partners from Estonia. We can't do it on our own because we would end up putting things the wrong way, upside down, and so on. So it depends on local partners.
The German things here.
Yeah.
If there are German things here, we have also in the museum from Baltic German culture or so on. So we can say that you want those also back.
Well, I could ask, were the German Baltic families really helpful for the Estonian nation, or were they more like colonizers? When I walk through the city of Lübeck, and I know that many Baltic Germans financially supported the building of our museum in the 1890s, I can say much of the wealth, of the riches, of the beautiful buildings I see in Lübeck come from the Hanseatic trade, but also come from the exploitation of people in the Baltic area. So it's a problematic history, and I realized that people in Estonia are not so critical about German Baltic families, but to a certain extent I feel it's also a kind of colonial situation, how it was before the First World War. But that's my personal view, of course.
Thank you. Kas on veel küsimusi? Tahab keegi ehk? No kui ei paista, siis ma kasutan oma võimu. I'll ask myself then. I was a bit surprised that this lodja model found its place as a symbol of roots in this exhibition to the waterways.
Yeah.
Could you explain, was it your decision? Was it the decision of a partner from Ukrainian side? How it ended up that way?
It was mixed. It was a local archaeologist who said about the importance of waterways, of bringing goods from Lübeck, from Narva, for example, all the way through the lakes, through the rivers into the Russian and Ukrainian territory. I don't know if the boats really went all the way to Ukraine. I have my doubts about it, but it's definitely that these boats were part of the trade network somehow, and that's why I agreed to this interpretation.
Okay, thank you. Kas on vahepeal veel mõni küsimus tekkinud?
Will they stay in Lübeck forever in the exhibition?
Possibly.
Kena. Aitäh veel kord esinejale. Thank you once again.